Just over 2 years ago, I posted a video about how to create a JToH tower in Obby Creator, and that video has been my most viewed video for a long time. Since making that video, I have made many more towers, and my building skills and knowledge of this game have improved significantly. In this tutorial, I'll be sharing with you everything about building towers, from the most basic types of jumps to how to add detail to your towers to creating insane button contraptions. Feel free to skip around this video using its chapters if you like. Also, if you do go on to enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to hit 3,000 subscribers this year. This is also the first video of building Ring 3, which a lot of you have been asking about for a long time, and we're finally starting that. You might be wondering how it already has 11 likes. Well, this was previously the Obby slot High Effort Obby, which was a scrapped video where I was kind of making fun of featured obbies, because a lot of them are essentially this. The first thing you're going to need to decide is what dimensions you want your tower to be and how many floors it will have. Personally, I make my towers have 30 by 30 frame parts and 8 floors, but you might want to do something different depending on the dimensions of your Obby slot, and that will depend on which of these game passes you own and which ones you don't own. Some other good tower dimensions you may want to use include a 25 by 25 with 4 floors, 65 by 65 with 10 floors, and 100 by 100 with 10 floors. For reference, a tower in JToH has the dimensions of the last example I just gave, and for that example and the one before it, I would recommend you only use those dimensions if you're putting a tower on its own Obby slot rather than in a ring with several towers in the same Obby slot. As far as building a ring goes, you can do rings or towers on their own, or sort of a mixture of both. What I do is I have each ring using these dimensions, and the Citadel and Soul Crushing each go on their own Obby slot using one of these dimensions. In playing Requested Obbies number 13, I saw someone who had the rings lobby as one Obby slot and each tower as its own. Do whichever of these options you believe will best work for you, or do something even different that I didn't mention here. Now that you've decided your tower's dimensions, you will need to actually build the frame. Like I said, for the rings, like not things on their own Obby slot, I do 30 by 30. So we're going to scale apart, and I know it's 3 dimensions, and I only said 30 by 30. The other dimension is just one stud. Some people make them like, whoops, wrong button. Just make it that color for now. Some people make it like as thin as they can make this, like to save money, but I don't like to do that because then you can like dance clip through it. I like to start by building the floor, and you want to duplicate it and then move it over like this. You want the corners between the frame parts to look like this, where it's like that. I don't really know how to describe that really. Then we want to do that on these other 2 sides. Typically like the front wall will be transparent, so it'll be like a window, but occasionally you'll see one that's like all sides are transparent. Which, by the way, making it transparent, you want it to be 0.6 transparency, which will look like this. Sometimes they're all transparency 0, where you can't see through any of them, or sometimes they're all transparency 0.6, where you can't see through them, or sometimes there's not even a frame at all. But this is the most common way to do this. So now you're going to want to select the 4 of these parts that are not the floor. Then you want to clone it, and then make sure you line it up just right. So you want it to go right there. Duplicate it again, and then do this for however many floors you're going to make your tower be. So like I said, I do 8 floors. So what I'm going to do is do that. And then to make this go a little bit faster, I'm just going to select all of these, and then deselect the bottom one. And then just, oh, okay. Well, I was going to just duplicate all these, and then it would go really fast. But while we're talking about that, what I would recommend you do on any Obby slot is you take a part, you use it to essentially store money. So you would do this, you place one down to make it use all your money. I'm not going to do that right now though. If you ever reach cash limit, you'll just scale this up to kind of store the money in there for a time, like building a frame that like uses a lot of money at once. Because typically as you're building gameplay, like you don't use very much money. In talking about that, I have gotten the remainder of the money I need, so this is just the last floor I need to place. So yeah, the like cash storage part trick, that's why sometimes in my videos you might see after a cut, like all my money just goes down like at once. That's because like in between the cut, I probably noticed that I was at cash limit and scaled the part up. One thing that doesn't affect anything too much, but it's probably worth mentioning, is that when you sell or scale a part down, it only gives you 70% of the money back. That does make sense in some games. I don't think this is one of them, but whatever, that's the case. So yeah. So now we have our frame, and now it's time to color it. There are 2 ways to do this. You can either do a gradient or just like random colors. So I'm going to do a gradient here. We're going to make it be like a dark purple to like this color. We're going to consider this tower the sequel to the one I built in the other tutorial from 2 years ago. So we kind of have our 2 endpoints in mind of the gradient. I actually never really like get the 2 endpoints and then put things somewhere in between. I kind of just start with a color and then go from there with like the end point in mind, if that makes sense. With each floor, we're going to slowly want to move this up a little bit so it's like as bright as we want. Then we're going to want to move this over a little bit. So let's move this up about that much, and then maybe like to there. Okay, that looks good. So now we'll repeat the same thing. Oh yeah, and it'll have like whatever this default color is, or whatever the frame part already is. You can do this to like select the color you want, And then before you click OK, you can change it. Now, the last thing before we move on to the next section of this video is I want to talk about deciding a difficulty and building the portal frame. Deciding a difficulty, there's not really much to that, just pick one. But I wouldn't recommend choosing a difficulty that you haven't beaten or had a lot of experience with that difficulty in JToH, because you want to match the difficulty as best you can. We will talk about difficulty matching later in this video. Since the first tower from the other tutorial was intense difficulty, it would make sense that this would be either intense difficulty or higher. I'm gonna make this one be intense as well though. There's no rule saying that if there's a sequel to a tower, then it should be a similar or higher difficulty. Nothing specifically says that, but I think it makes sense. Okay, as for building the portal, I'd recommend either following like a random tutorial on YouTube, or just like, I'll just look at this so you can see what this looks like. So you have a 2x6x1 part, a 2x4x2 wedge, a 1x2x2 wedge, and a 1x1x2 wedge. And then sort of in this like corner created by these two wedges, you want to put a part here that goes across 6 studs, so making it a 6x1x1. And then you basically repeat this over here. You can copy and paste it and flip it around if you want. And then you have the sign, which are these dimensions, and you put the tower name on it. And then you can put the teleporter and make it the difficulty you like. Also, you noticed I had a pre-made of this. I would highly recommend you do that, because it makes it so much easier. You can also save other types of frames, like a Citadel portal if you want. Okay, now for the portal itself, make it neon and make it be the color of the difficulty. So for intense, that's the difficulty. And set the teleport location to somewhere in the tower. The color of the portal frame should be the first floor of the tower. And what I'm gonna name this tower is gonna be Tower of Updated Video Tutorials, because the other one was called Tower of Video Tutorials, and so this one will be called Tower of Updated Video Tutorials, because this is an updated video tutorial. If you played JToH and are familiar with obbies, then chances are you already know most of the most common types of jumps, such as wraparounds, head hitters, long jumps, and tight ropes. They're all great to use in a variety of places as you build towers. I'll quickly explain how you can create each of these if you don't already know. We'll start with a truss here, and we'll put our wraparound right here. Like, because if it were too close, then you'd just be able to, like, jump around it, and that wouldn't make any sense. So wraparounds are indeed very easy to make. Just do something like this. And the, like, width of the wraparound depends on the difficulty. An 8-star wraparound matches the difficulty intense. And another thing, some people will do wraparounds, like, just ignore that. Some people will build wraparounds like this. The issue with that is that you can wall hop. However, if you build it like this, then it uses another part. I always like to do something like this, where it like, why am I saying like so many times? So that this is down more, if that makes sense. So that there was no way I could have made this with any less parts than this. So there were no wasted parts, I guess. And you can also kind of move things around if you do it like this. Like if I wanted to make this like that, or do something like this. I don't even know if that's possible. Okay, it is. Head hitters are basically this. I know I didn't build that very well, but like you basically do that. So now I will build that better and space them evenly. So you can start with your first part you're going to jump to, and then I like to use snap to grid to space parts equally. You jump like 10 studs high when you press space, unless you have a modified jump power, but the Roblox avatar is 6 studs tall, so doing like 8 or 9 should be good. We'll do 8. And then just move it up like this. Actually, I don't want that last one. Since this is on the next floor, we also want to change the color of these to match that. And there we go. There's our head hitters. Something I'm going to do, though, is I want to move this over. That way, like, this is the bottom platform. But then we just have a point, and then this is just pointless to be here. So I'll delete that. That's just how I decide I want to do that here. Next up, we have long jumps. The longest long jump that is typically on intense difficulty would probably be like an 11.5. Sometimes for like wraparounds and things and long jumps and things like that, it kind of depends on whether it's over a safety net or not. Like on an outside section, on an intense tower, 40 minutes into the tower, it wouldn't really make much sense to have an 11.5 stud intense difficulty. Like you could kind of do that, but you'd probably only see something like that on like Insane Plus. But since this is like 20 seconds into the tower, I think an 11.5 stud jump will be fine here. So if you notice that, I put like a temporary part here to sort of measure the distance. You can see 11.5. Sometimes may not want to delete this. You might want to do that, where you make it can collide false and transparency 0.6. That way, if a player comes to this point, they can count they can count the studs and they'll see, oh, it's an 11.5. You don't have to do that, and it's more common to see this if it's like, if the jump is not against a wall. Like here, you could just count the studs on the wall, so this isn't entirely necessary, but I'll put it there anyway. Let's say this is like out here, not attached to a frame or anything, then this would be useful. Lastly, tightropes. These are typically neon. The size of the tightrope, again, depends on the difficulty, kind of affected by whether it's on an outside section or not, and also affected by whether it's like aligned with the like global axes, which I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So I'm going to have this like over a safety net, essentially, because this is not very far into the tower, and it'll be alignable. So I think 0.1 should be good. Well, no, I'll do 0.15. So then you can scale in both directions by using control, by holding down control and then scaling like that. And you want to make it be neon difficulty. I mean, texture, material. What is this? Material. On any material other than plastic, having any of these things set doesn't affect anything. But I always like to just set neon things back to smooth, just because I just do. And sometimes on neon parts, such as tightropes or for decoration, I'll make the brightness of it a little bit brighter, because on a darker color it's like a lot darker, but here you can see it kind of stands out from the frame a little bit more, so it looks better in my opinion, but you don't have to do that. And there's our tightrope, but it is kind of close to the wall, which makes it so like it's way easier. So we'll move this over a little bit. So what I mean by alignable is whether you can use like greater than less than keys to line yourself up, because if we have something on global, which that's what this button does, if you don't know, it changes your movement from global to local. So like let's say I have it on global, I rotate this, you can see how on local these are changed, but on here it's just like straight up and down. So the global axes is what I meant earlier. So those directions you can like kind of lock your view on using greater than less than, not on mobile unfortunately. That's what makes this easier. So if you just line it up, then it's super easy. Like you literally just press W or A, S, or D. But probably W, because why would you do a tightrope sideways? Oh yeah, and one last thing about tightropes is you can also make them curved if you want. I think you can do that using this, but I'm pretty sure you have to pay for that, and I don't have that, so I'm also lazy, so I just keep tightropes like this. It also saves parts to make it be, like, not curved. Well, you can do a lot with just basic parts. Let's be honest, that gets kind of boring after a while. So now I'll show you how you can make some advanced parkour using parts that can be found in the Advanced tab and Moving Parts tab. I'll show you how to make sections using each one of these part types. Advanced Tools part. That's this little advanced thingy. That means you have to have Advanced Tools Game Pass to be able to use this. So if you go to the properties and go over here and go to Advanced Tools, you have a bunch of settings that you can change. That basically sets what it is like overall for your obby. So when you first enter the obby, it will have all these settings enabled. If, let's say, you want to change that for a certain section of a tower, you can use this to change any of those settings. And similarly, we have all these other options here. That's what the global properties does, which this one apparently doesn't require advanced tools. So we'll talk about this one a little bit more later, but for now, let's do something with an advanced tools part. Let's just change the daytime. The default is 10, and the way that property works is think about it like a 24-hour clock. So that's like 10 a.m. If it was like 16, that'd be noon, so 12 plus 4, so that's 4 p.m. Like in terms of positioning of the sun. So like if I made this daytime 7, and then I stepped on this, that would change the time to show the sun as if it were 7 a.m. 0 is midnight. I think the highest this can go is like 23.9. Yeah. So 0 and 23.9 are going to look pretty much the same because it's 0.1 hours difference. Let's do 5. We also need to make sure it's impossible not to hit this advanced tools part. So we'll just scale it across this entire thing. And maybe do that too, just to be safe. Next up, we have buttons. Now, there's an entire section of this video dedicated to just talking about these, but the basics of what you need to know about buttons is that they can do any of these things, but the ones you'll mainly use are make objects visible and make objects invisible. And you can have that for an infinite time by typing in 0 or for a set amount of time. Let's do like 12 for the section I have in mind, but I'm going to change that probably after I actually test it. So then let's make it a color like, it doesn't really have to match the frame, but I think it looks nice if you do that. So we'll make it like this color. And then the material is metal. Now in JToH, there's like a button texture thing that goes on buttons. Some people like to do that in Obby Creator, but I don't, because Obby Creator has a limit of 1 special effect per part. So if you put an image, then you could only put it on 1 face unless you use 4 additional parts, or in some cases, all 6 faces. This is the decal ID for that button texture if you want it, but personally I think it looks really weird having that on just one face, so that's why I don't like to do this, but you can if you want. So what I have in mind is when you press this button, it's going to activate a wraparound, as well as like a ladder or something over here. I think a 1.5 stud wrap should be good. Then we'll set all the properties of this to be the same as the frame, except for the color, which we want to match that of the button. Let's do another one. So the button is going to activate these, and you'll need to do the wraparounds, and then you'll ladder flick off here, and then the end location you're trying to get to can be a sphere, which I'll place right here. Actually, I don't think you'll be able to jump to that. I'll instead put it here. Now that we have this built, we're going to select objects and link it to that, to all of the parts it's going to activate. Then press confirm, and make sure we have this on what we want it to, which is make objects visible. But these will still be activated because that's like what they are kind of by default. So I need to change this to, you can either make it be completely transparent, or in some cases you might want it to be 0.6 transparency. That way you can kind of see what's going to be activated before you actually press the button. But again, that's however you want to do that. Okay, so that took about until I had 5 seconds left. So that means I could take off like 5 seconds from here. We'll just take off 4 though, so you have 8 seconds to do this. The time should be more lenient on a more easy tower. So like that I think is fine. If this were like a soul crushing tower, then we might want this to be like, you have to do it essentially perfectly to make it in time. Button deactivator is exactly what it sounds like. You connect it to a button like that, like the same way you connect a button to a part, and then when you do that, it'll deactivate it. So it didn't do anything because it wasn't activated, but now it is. You can see it does that. There isn't really any case I'm going to be using that at the moment. I don't really have any use for that at the moment though. Checkpoint. This is not really useful to people building JToH towers. The only reason this is really useful is to like set your spawn within the obby slot, like before you actually get into a tower, like in the lobby, which I don't like to do. I just like to keep the spawn as out there. That way if you die, then you go back to the lobby and it resets all the effects. But if you're in a checkpoint, then it doesn't change anything. So like, let's say I died in the tower for whatever reason, or I just reset. Now all the effects will be reset and ready to be set back to what I want them to be for the lobby, based on what I have selected for these options. But if you're wondering how this actually works, you can probably figure it out. It just sets your spawn point to this. And it's actually the very center of this. So maybe if you wanted to, you could do something like that. And then you'd reset. Or maybe if I don't think there's any way you can like disable resetting. You could do like that, and then you have to find a way to respawn your character. That's a good update idea. The ability to disable resetting. The arrows that are there when you select it indicate the direction it's going, but you can also make them show up even if it's not selected, or like if you're just playing the obby. So under behavior, you can change the speed of the conveyor, and for reference, the walk speed of a player is 16. So if you set it to 16 and you're aligned perfectly, then you're just gonna be doing this all day until you stop. Arrows enabled is whether the arrows are actually moving, and the transparency is the transparency of them. So I almost always have arrows enabled true, arrows transparency 0. Like I don't usually have like this or like this or something. Like I either have this or I have this. And that brings us to the topic of marked or unmarked conveyors. It's another thing that's affected by whether it's over a safety net and the difficulty and factors such as that. So let's say we're on an outside section here. I would definitely want that to be a marked conveyor because like it would just be annoying and pretty unfair if it wasn't. Now there isn't a ton of progress to be lost here, so in this instance I could do either one, marked or unmarked, but I think I'll leave it marked. So that would be how you do that section, and that matches intense difficulty well in my opinion. Another thing you can do with conveyors is conveyor launches. I don't remember if I made that up myself or if they're actually called that. So for this, you're going to want a high-speed conveyor, especially if it's of a shorter distance. So we'll do like 50. We're going to need to like make this go into an outside section or something. So we'll do this. And so you would launch your character in like a distance like that, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to jump. So it's 14, so 30 minus 14 is 16, and that's not possible otherwise with normal walk speed and stuff. I mean, maybe it's possible with like an FPS unlocker or some crazy thing like that, which yes, somehow that would be possible with higher frames. I don't really know how that works, but it does. Sometimes for conveyor launches, you could have it unmarked if it was like a super long straight platform and then a huge gap. You can kind of figure out that that's a conveyor launch just by looking at it. I think right here, once you land on this platform, we're gonna have it so it goes back to being daytime. So 10. So fading and falling parts go together because you kind of use them similarly. So I'm going to make some parkour using fading parts to get up to a platform, which can be over here. So we'll start with fading parts because those are first in the list here. So in a similar way to conveyors, you will want to make these be marked or unmarked. But similar to conveyor launches, it's sometimes kind of easy to infer that they're fading parts or falling parts. So like let's say you're a player of a tower and you come across a bunch of jumps that seem suspiciously easy like this, chances are they're falling parts or fading platforms. Oh, and if you don't know what these actually do, fading parts, they fade over a set duration when you stand on them. And then when they become completely invisible, they become can't collide falls and you fall through them. Falling parts are pretty much the same, except instead of fading, they fall. Fading parts fade and falling parts fall. Now you might be wondering, how would you mark a fading part or a falling part? The most common way is by setting the surface to like inlet or universal. So you can see that they look different, so a player would think, oh, there's probably something different about these. It's probably a fading or falling part. Or you might want to have just like a set sort of thing for your tower, like in this tower, all universal parts are fading parts and all inlet parts are falling parts or something like that. I'm not going to do that here. You can also use text to put like an exclamation mark on here. So I'll demonstrate how to do that. So you would add text and then you put it on the top or whatever face it is, and then set your preferred text settings such as font. Usually there'll be like an exclamation mark or something. Instead of putting those same settings in 6 more times, I'm just going to copy and paste these again and actually put less of them. Fading parts you'll make pretty much exactly the same. And to change the fade time and falling delay and things like that, gear part is a relatively new addition to this game. I haven't really used it, but what it does, it'll give you a gear, which you can choose here. It's like different properties you can change depending on which one you choose. That is pretty much not useful at all for the sake of building JToH towers. The only one that's kind of useful would be flashlight if you want to do something with that. Like if you wanted to make like a cave thing or something. You get a flashlight in Tower of Dreams and Caverns in JToH, so that's kind of an example of how you might use that. Global properties part. So similar to the advanced tools parts, you can change these settings, except instead of things from the advanced tools tab, it's any of these. So you can change the property here. A lot of these are like lighting effects. Some of them I don't even know what they do. Oh, and for the fly tool, if you want to give people this to like play your tower with, or just like so they don't have to, if you want them to like be able to freely play sections, then you can do that. And so this is how you can kind of have this function as a gear giver, but for the fly tool. The one I mainly use this for is this property, which is the jump power. It uses percents rather than actual jump power. So like the default jump power of a Roblox character is 50, but in Obby Creator it's 100, so it's like 100%. Except for like walk speed, it is actually what it is, like 16, but I don't know why. If I set it to 100, you can see it doesn't change anything because that's what it is by default. If I change it to 150 though, you can see I jump a little bit higher. We'll do like one jump using this, and also I'll make this look like a normal part. This next part you'll jump to, we'll set it back to the default. We also want it so you don't have this increased jump power if you like go back this direction. So keep that in mind if as you build increased jump sections or no jump sections or high speed sections or anything like that. To do this, I'm just going to do this, so it'll set it, if you attempt to, I gotta make sure you can't jump over it though. So if you attempt to go back, it will change your jump power back to normal. And you could probably figure out how to build outside sections, or like how to make a gap in the wall for you to go through to enter or exit an outside section. This is basically how you do that. It's very simple. We'll make it a little bit more difficult though, because this is intense difficulty. We'll do like this. So it's only 6 studs, so you like kind of have to do that. It's a little bit more tricky than what I had a moment ago. Heal part. In the original tutorial, I said that you shouldn't really use this on higher difficulty towers, but I've kind of changed my opinion on that. So what this does is it'll heal you as you stand on it, however much you have this set. So when I use these, I'll set it to 10. That way you can heal up to full in 10 seconds or less, because default max health, I don't know why I pressed tab, is 100. So I'll kind of show you an example of where I use this, which would be in Tower of Among Us. Floor 6, side 3, which is this one, I think. I think it's this teleporter. Yeah. Okay, so you have to do this, like, you have to do a bunch of push boxes and, like, drag them around on this kill brick floor. And you can see you lose health pretty fast. Instead of being annoying and making you have to spend, like, literally 10 minutes in the section from healing up so much, I just put this here, so it'll go much faster. Tower of Among Us is Ring 2's Soul Crushing Tower, by the way. So it's insane difficulty, yet I used a heal part. I'd recommend just using that to make it just more convenient and less annoying for players. Oh, hold on, I just noticed this. I want to change about this outside section. Try to avoid making it wall hoppable wherever possible. So like I used the same amount of parts, and now there's no horizontal seam right here, therefore you can't wall hop. You could still do that here, so on the where the floor changes, so maybe that was kind of pointless, but I don't know. Jump pads are next, but I'm gonna start it up here because it would kind of mess up how I want to use the space here. So we'll just make the parkour I build after this lead up to this platform. Basically, the way you use jump parts or jump pads is, once again, it's based on percentages. So it does that. That's what I'm trying to say. Oh, maybe it's not percentages, because that was way higher. Okay, so this one is actual jump power. I don't know why it would be different. That doesn't make any sense. So 100 is the default, which is that high. I'm gonna make this like 75. We'll make it so this like takes you up to the next floor or something. For me personally, the way I like to design, like make these look in my towers is default color and neon. That takes us to lava, which I'll go back down here for. After you enter back in the tower, we'll have it so you jump to a kill brick here. So a kill brick deals 5 damage, an ouch brick I think does 10 or 15, I don't remember which, but you don't see those very often anyway, and an insta kill does 100 damage. I also like to do like red kill bricks, which deal 35 damage, but that's not an official thing in JToH. The way these are typically used is same color as the frame, like a normal part, and the granite texture, and then sometimes can collide true, sometimes can collide false. It depends on how it's used. Let me quickly verify that this jump is possible. It is. So we'll basically just have a bunch of like jumps like this, and I didn't take damage there because I have invincible while editing on. Here's what it looks like as you actually take damage. If you're going to use ouch bricks or the red kill bricks that deal 35 damage, I don't think there's a specific like way they're typically used, I guess, kind of like how this is this color, like the same color as the frame. They're pretty rare in JToH towers anyway. If you're going to make a section using them, I would suggest putting a sign that warns the player. Music part is the next thing I'll talk about. So on my 8-floor towers like this, usually I have one song that plays for the first 4 floors and another song for the next 4 floors. Okay, it's story time. Once upon a time, in a time before March of 2022, you could use any sound effect on the Roblox catalog you wanted in JToH towers or Obby Creator, anything like that. But then, the audio update. And now you can pretty much only use songs that were, for Obby Creator anyway, that were uploaded by Roblox. In your own Roblox game, you can use them uploaded by yourself. So technically they would work if they were uploaded by, I guess, Whirlpool Studio, because that's the group this game is under. Or uploaded by someone else and like access was given to this game, which I think you have to have edit permissions on this game to be able to do that. Therefore, Mario118118 is the only person who can give an audio he uploaded, like permission for it to be used in Obby Creator. Back in March 2022, on that Roblox dev forum post thing, it did say that eventually you could set audios to public, but as far as I'm aware, there's been zero update to that situation at all. So that means I can't use my own songs into towers. Well, I mean, I can, but only I can hear them. That's quite annoying. However, a lot of you said you'd like a Roro Studios music channel, which you can kind of use to just like open that in another tab and listen to the song that way, which is annoying, but at least that's something. And for Tower of Among Us, which I made its own OST for, that's uploaded on my main channel. So a lot of you voted for a Roro Studios music channel. Did I already say that? I'm pretty sure I already said that. So I'll maybe be making that soon. Okay, story time over. The way you use these is you put in the music ID. I pretty much never use any of these other options on this. But you put in the music ID, and then when the player walks on this, they will start hearing whatever sound it is. If there's nothing here, it'll just play the default Obby Creator background music. Also, when you get to the point where you want the song to be changed, you'll put your music part like this, or wherever the first platform is, I guess. And then you'll want to put another one like below here, so that if you fall, then the song will be changed back to whatever it is for the first 4 floors. And I set the teleport location at the start of this video to like right here, so that's why I put the music part there, so it would start as soon as you teleported here. A pressure plate is basically the same as a button, but it's only activated while either a player or a push box is like touching this, which we'll talk about push boxes later, but other than that, it's pretty much the same. A reset part will basically do this. It sets your spawn point back to outside the obby slot like that. That's not useful within towers, but it is like in win rooms, where it's like step on this button to return to the lobby. That is if you're doing like I'd like to, where the spawn point for your whole obby/ring is right there. Respawn parts, if this option is false, then it's basically just an insta kill, but it like actually is insta kill. I guess a 100 damage kill brick still instantly kills you, but this one also instantly respawns you. With this on, however, it'll respawn push parts, like literally what it says, and not players. So now I can stand on this fine, and it'll reset the position of a push block. But again, we'll talk about push blocks more later. Seat. This little arrow indicates what side the player will end up like sitting on and where they'll be facing. So it's like that. And I like to use this texture when I use these. Often I like to just sort of rotate them kind of randomly. I still want them to be sort of facing upwards though when I do seat part jumps. And since these have been added, you can actually make a seat not using a trip part, so using an actual seat. Or like make a chair or a couch. So that makes a little bit more sense. And we'll talk about trip parts in just a moment. I'll put a wraparound after the seat part jump section, and then you'll land on the speed pad. So this is kind of similar to the high jump section we did earlier. You can make a section where you have increased walk speed or a decreased walk speed. The color I like to make these is this and neon. That's how I like to make these look. And in this case, I want this to be Cancellide False. I think the highest you can set this is 64. Yeah, which is 4 times the default walk speed. So 16 is the default walk speed, 32 is double that, 64 is quadruple that. And then 8 would be half, 4 would be a fourth, 2 would be an eighth, 1 would be a 16th. Most of the time for speed sections, though, I set the walk speed to 32. Now, for a speed section, there are kind of 2 ways you can start it off. You can either make it so it's impossible not to hit the speed pad, kind of like we did down there, where it's impossible not to hit the advanced tools part. Or you can make it so it is possible to avoid it, however, you're not going to be able to do the following jump if you don't have it. So this is kind of both of those. Let's say it was kind of like this and you like wall hopped or somehow avoided this. This next jump would be impossible. So you'd have to hit the speed pad to progress. Now you might be wondering, why would you want to not have increased walk speed? Let's say during the speed section you're doing a bunch of one stud jumps. Those are actually easier like with the default walk speed because it's kind of easier to control. So for that reason, a player might want to try and avoid getting the increased walk speed to make this easier. You'll have it after this jump. You won't jump here. You'll jump on top of this wraparound. For the speed deactivators, or like to set it back to normal walk speed, you can do this like to, I guess, end out the speed section. You might want to make this like resetter be invisible or something, but I'm going to make this can collide true and like actually be part of the gameplay. So that also, like the way I've used this here, like, I guess this, you have to hit the speed resetter, therefore there's no way to use this to your advantage on the upcoming sections. And one last thing, similar to the music parts, you want to make it so if you fall before the speed section, it's going to reset your walk speed. So you're going to do this. When you're putting like giant parts like this to reset whatever the case may be, set it to 0.01 or 0.05, like on this axis, since it doesn't really matter. I don't really know why I do 0.05. It is 5 times as much money, but it's like not that much anyway, so it doesn't really affect anything. Oh, I'm at max cash limit. How long has that been the case? I should do something about that. There we go. You might need to make this like a larger area that this speed resetter covers if the increased walk speed covers an outside section. Teleport pads are also quite simple. You literally just set the location you want to teleport to. So set and then click the location. Now what move does is it like lets you move it kind of like just any part. Lets you move the location to. When that was added, it basically made it so that you didn't have to place a temporary part and do that. So that was nice when that was added, but I personally don't use that very much. Another thing to keep in mind when putting teleporter destinations is what if the player is still walking? You don't want them to like fall off. You don't want them to like walk off the platform because that would be kind of annoying. For playing obbies in general, I would recommend that when you jump to a teleporter, you like jump to it, kind of like that, and don't be holding W, A, S, or D when you actually hit it. But for building it, assume the player is doing that. So like, even though you're kind of walking forwards most likely here, like especially when you don't, especially assuming the player doesn't know the location, like, I don't know, just putting a wall here that's like 4 or more studs tall. I think 3 will work, but I usually just do 4 to be safe. Doing that should prevent anyone from walking over without jumping, because usually people won't be jumping when they jump to a teleporter, like holding space or jump button. We're almost there. Timed lava and timed parts. Really, I just need to demonstrate this with timed parts. It has a set duration activated and a set duration deactivated, and timed lava is the exact same thing, but it's a kill brick. I typically use these to make beat block sections, and I usually use 1 second, things like that. I guess we can make this universal, like, you can probably tell that they're beat blocks, but I don't know. Okay, so you want to place all your beat blocks. I make them evenly spaced, similar to fading and falling platforms like this. And then you want to select every other one, and then set the timed offset to be whatever your hidden time is. Or like, okay, usually for beat blocks, I will set both this and this to be the exact same thing. The only reason you really wouldn't is if you want to make like it cycle through multiple different things, such as for making a wind pad look like it does in JToH. But there, now this will work like beat blocks. Like I said, timed lava is just the same thing, but it's it's lava. Trip parts. We're almost done with this part of the video. This is literally taking forever. I like to make these be inlet. What it does is it will make your character kind of go into a sitting position like this when you land on it. Notice I tilted the platform a little bit. That's because if it's level, then you might end up like this, where you just like, yeah. The only way you could really end up falling over is if like you land on the edge or something. So yes, it's a little bit harder technically than a normal platform, but I would suggest slanting it on at least one axis so that way you do indeed have to hold space. Okay, moving parts. I don't have to go through all these because a lot of them are very similar. So moving part will move between two destinations. Currently there's no way to add multiple locations, but there is kind of a way you can make it appear to have multiple locations, but it isn't really that flexible. But before I show you that, move time changes the time it takes to move. Reverse changes whether it like goes back and forth or whatever. Stick changes whether your character sticks to it or not. So this is stick on, and stick off is like this. So you kind of have to walk with it. Moving activation type, we'll talk about that more when I talk about buttons later. Easing style is also the main one I use. That just makes it look a little bit nicer. So you have all these different ones. I usually use exponential. Sigmoid also looks good because it kind of like completely comes to a stop. And I guess exponential does as well, but it like moves really fast immediately. We'll keep it as exponential here, though, I guess. Now, here's how you can make it appear to have multiple locations. It's by having reverse set to false, and then when you have 4 of them, I guess maybe you could do this with more. But, like, okay, so you want to set the destination here to here. Like, okay, so you can kind of see how I'm doing this. The placement of things. Then once we get all these placed, it appears that they're all just going in a circle. But in reality, what's happening is this is actually teleporting or like resetting its position back to over here. And as you can see, this still appears just as good with different easing styles. Oh, I misaligned this one a little bit. Let's just move this over. There we go. So moving parts are all going to function like that, except it can also be lava or fading part or timed part or whatever. These are spinners. Well, they spin. You get it. Spinners spin. Isn't that what it says in Toast? Spin distance is what you're going to want to do if you want to make like a part orbit around a certain point rather than spin like that. Spin time, similar to moving time. Spinning parts also support easing styles, but it isn't really as useful for spinning because like if you have it on none, then it just like continuously spins. So it looks fine. Once again, there are different types of spinning parts for different part types. So there's a spherical version and a block version of a push block. I think if you go into data, then you can make a push block also be a push cylinder as well if you want to. So there are kind of 2 ways you can use a push box. You can do kind of like this, where you have to get the push box to a certain location in order to get on top of a wall. That wouldn't be possible otherwise. If I don't use the push block, you can't jump over this. The other thing is by making it lead to a button or a pressure plate that will activate or deactivate something. When you're making a push block button, what you need to do is turn push block activated on, and in most cases you're going to also want to turn player activated off, because what's the point of getting the push box to it if the player can also activate it? Now we're going to want our push box destroyers, which may be an easier tower. You might not want these, but here I'm going to use them. So you want to use a respawn part and set this to true. I mentioned this earlier on. And then you just sort of place these in a way that you'll have to avoid the push box destroyers. So I think that'll be good. But of course, we should test it. Okay, yeah, this isn't really going to be possible. So let's make that slightly easier. Okay, yes, that's possible. I'll just need to change some settings on that button. You will also, most of the time, need a push box resetter button. Set this to reset push blocks and link it to that. Another thing you're going to want to do is make it so it resets the push box if the push box, like, falls. So that, you use another respawn part, but it's going to be invisible. And once again, set respawn push parts to true. So if you push this off either side of the tower, then it's going to do that. Actually, I don't like how high up that is. It should fall for a second. I think it'll look better if it falls for a second. Now we'll link these buttons the same way we did with the button section that was down there. And I don't want this to be timed. Something you could do using spherical push boxes is this, where you have to like roll it along a track. The way you do that is you just make a teleport pad that will teleport you like over here. Once again, make sure there's like walls around it like we did down here. And I suggest you put a sign that explains what to do as well. And a respawn button. So the way you do this is kind of like that. And also that's the end of the tower. I also need to make sure that this covers this whole area, which it didn't before, but now it does. Like, because this could still roll that way. Buttons are the key to making really cool client objects. For this, I'm going to point out the most important settings for buttons and then show you several sections I've built in the past and how I used those settings to create them. For button type, you select one of these 5 options. Make objects visible will change all the parts the button is linked to transparency 0 or visible and can collide true. Unfortunately, there's currently no way to make it change one of those properties or to make the activated objects have a different amount of transparency like 0.6. However, there are a few ways to get around this, which I'll talk about later. Make objects invisible is similar, but it changes the parts linked to transparency 1 invisible and can collide false. Once again, you can't currently only change one of those properties or use a different transparency value, but there are workarounds. Make objects visible and invisible are the button types you'll use most frequently, but as for reset push blocks, like I said earlier, it will respawn the push block or blocks the button is connected to. Activate parts will activate whatever parts it's connected to. Shocking. I mainly use this on moving parts with their activation set to button activated, which makes moving parts start moving, but it can also activate fading parts and probably a few other parts too. The time setting, as you can probably guess, determines how long the button will stay activated in seconds. By default, this value is 5, but you can make it higher or lower if you want. If you want the button to stay activated forever after being pressed, although it can be deactivated again by a button deactivator, type 0 into this field, and it will change to infinite. Objects is, of course, how you link the button to the part or parts you want. Click Edit, and then click all the parts you want the button to be connected to. If you click a part that's already connected, which it will be outlined in red, it will unlink that part. So let's say I wanted to select these 4 things, but then I changed my mind, I wanted to deselect this one, I would do that. Something to keep in mind is that each button can be connected to up to 30 parts. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have a Make Objects Visible button, and you link the parts you want, you'll then have to select all the parts normally and make them invisible and can't collide false. Most of the time. Sometimes you want different options on a part before it's activated. In order to make a Make Objects Invisible button appear to make a part transparency 0.6 and can collide false instead of transparency 1 and can collide false, what you're going to have to do is it will deactivate the visible can collide true part. That will become invisible, but it will reveal a part that's not linked to any buttons that is can collide false and transparency 0.6. In order for a Make Objects Visible button to make an object appear as not transparency 0, however, is a little bit more complicated than that. You actually don't use Make Objects Visible at all if you're going to do this trick. You need to set it to Make Objects Invisible. And so you have your part that you want to appear to activate, and so then you're going to take another part and put it around here and make sure it's completely surrounding the part. Make this transparency 0.99 and can collide false, and give it the material glass. Notice how it makes the part inside of it invisible. You can still kind of see it because I'm in edit mode and there's all these things happening. If I exit this, you can see you can't see it unless you look very closely. This button is going to deactivate this, so it will appear that this activates. Now I'll show you some of the cool sections I've built in the past that use buttons as well as how I made them. So the idea of this tower is you go into the crystal caverns to collect the dream crystal, like yes, Dream the Minecraft YouTuber. What was interesting is that the idea is that after you collect it, you come back to this point. This is the win pad, but until you actually collect it, it's not going to do anything. So what I did was I made this 2 buttons, some to activate things and some to deactivate things. So the things that will deactivate is the crystal here, this wall here, and the things it activates are the parts that allow you to get to this elevator that take you back up here. Oh, it also deactivates this thing, which prevents you from walking this way from the start. And it also activates the teleport pad right here. Next is Citadel of Abstraction, floors 5 through 8. So this is like a button speedrun rising lava section. Oh yeah, also I used a timed button to temporarily activate a thing here to make you stand in this for a few seconds, so it makes sure it changes all the effects using the advanced tools parts and things. That's because when you change 5+ effects at the same time, the game is sometimes a little bit slow to process that. So we have multiple buttons once again. We have the music part, which changes the music, which no longer works because audio update. We have a button that's going to activate parts. It's going to activate the moving part with the moving activation type set to button activated. And so it's going to move slowly up to here over the course of 250 seconds, which we set within the settings of the moving part, which activates all these regular platforms that are button activated. But because of the button limit of 30, I had to make it so that you eventually got to another button, and then there are multiple buttons you get to. So at the start of Tower of Festive Facility Infiltration, which it has been brought to my attention that in JToH Christmas 2019, there was Steeple of Festive Factory Infiltration, which I had literally no idea of. So what I'm going to show here is that you have to do 2 things before you're able to get in. So the first one is that you have to push this onto here, There's like a storyline to it. You can pause and read this if you want, but I don't feel like explaining that. Then the second one is that you get to this button, and then that'll deactivate 2 parts here. It looks like there's one, but that's just because they're the same size, position, dimensions, etc. Now that those are both deactivated, you can walk in here. Then you click this button to enter. Adding detail to your towers makes them visually interesting. I have an entirely separate video on detailing towers, which is more in-depth, but there's really no right or wrong way to do this. Here are my personal 3 favorite ways to add detail, though. So the first one is neon. I mainly did this in Citadel of Abstraction, where I put neon underneath everything with like 0.25 like this, and then I guess I'll use the same neon colors up there because it doesn't match the floor anyway. So I put neon under everything, and I also set it to can collect false so it doesn't affect the gameplay. Chances are it wouldn't really anyway, but there. Oh, another thing is putting neon inside of trusses. I kind of did that while talking about something else, so I'll show that again. Basically what you do is you take a regular part and scale it so that it is the same dimensions as the truss. Then you want to have your snap to grid be 0.5, then hold control and scale it in like this on all 3 axes. Because you're holding control, it'll go like half of 0.5 in both directions, so it's 0.25. So if you're on mobile, then just scale it in all 6 of these inward by 0.25. And then I would make it this neon color, but it's going to be part of this blue activated truss, so I'm actually going to make it be, okay, we'll make it a little bit brighter. That would be how you do that if it's not button activated, but if it is button activated, I like to actually make it be fully transparent until the button activates it, which is quite easy to do. I just make that transparency 1 instead of 0.6. Then I need to link the button again. And we can test it. It looks so good. Wedges are another way I'd like to detail things. So like underneath parts kind of like this, pretty much just do that. It kind of makes it look a little bit more realistic because that kind of looks like it's supporting it, I guess. And lastly, adding kill bricks, especially on brighter colored floors, will add contrast. I guess right here I'll do 0.25 like underneath, pretty much exactly like I did with the neon down here. I guess I'll make this can collide false. It's the granite texture that like automatically makes it a darker color. So unlike neon, you don't need to make it like brighter or anything. Okay, I finished adding the detail to this. I also want to point out I added the YouTube logo onto the frame like I did the original tower. I mentioned at the start that you should have a difficulty in mind before you start building your tower's parkour. This is so you can have a general idea of what types of jumps you should and shouldn't have in your tower and how hard to make them. Keyword idea, though. This decision can always be changed after you build the parkour. After you finish your tower, I suggest you play through it and then make your final decision on what difficulty you're going to make it. The best tip I can give you regarding matching the difficulty you want as you're building is to just be familiar with what types of jumps are typically seen in towers of that difficulty. You don't necessarily have to have completed any towers of that difficulty in JToH, but still be familiar with them, such as either by just playing them, even if you haven't beaten them, or by watching videos of the towers of that difficulty. Let's say you built a tower and play tested it, but it is above or below the difficulty you want it to be, and you don't want to change the difficulty. In that situation, you'll need to nerf or buff your tower. To nerf something means to make it easier, and to buff it means to make it more difficult. Okay, so I just played through the tower, and I feel like it needs to be buffed a little bit, because it's kind of more like challenging, I guess. But I guess before I do that, I'll give some examples of ways this could be nerfed. Let's see, I could make these be not stick-out wraparounds. I could maybe slow down the conveyors. I could make these take longer to fade. These add more falling delay to them. Make this jump a little bit easier by like making this gap larger. Making this give a little bit more jump power so it'll be easier to jump to there. There's several examples, and in some cases I'm going to be basically doing the opposite of what I said. So like, let's see, I could do this, making these a 2 stud stick out. Okay, this platform is actually not useful, and it makes it more difficult if you have to jump to there. So then you'd have to like jump backwards like this in order to make that jump. And you can change the size of these to make these more difficult. I also added this because I apparently forgot to add anything connecting these 2 things. To end this video, I'm going to now share with you some miscellaneous tips for building towers. The first one is the cash storage part I mentioned earlier. In your obby, you should place a part off to the side, and whenever you reach your cash limit, scale up the part to spend that money. That way, when you're building a tower's frame or placing another large part, you can just scale this one down to get the necessary money. Use hotkeys whenever possible. You'll get used to them pretty quick, and it will speed up your building process a lot. You can hover over any of these buttons down here, and it will tell you the hotkey associated with it. For example, to delete a part, or enter delete mode if you don't have anything selected, press delete on your keyboard. By the way, that's delete and not backspace, just to make that clear. Use the teleport button hotkey as your deselect button. There's no actual deselect button, and I guess the reason is because this works perfectly fine. When you enter teleport mode, anything selected will deselect. If you actually do want to teleport anywhere afterwards, go ahead, but otherwise just press T again. Select parts that are far away by using the drag to select feature. There's a limit to how far a part can be away from you for you to select it, but by using drag to select, you can select things farther away. This will mostly be useful when you need to select your cache storage part. And if there are many other parts near the one you're trying to select, don't use this trick because you'll probably select one or more parts that you don't want to. Be very careful with the dragging mode. This can be enabled in settings, but only have it on when you actually need it. Otherwise, you can misclick and your mouse could end up moving something you don't want to. With Obby Creator currently lacking an undo button, something like this could take like 10 plus minutes to fix. As far as when you do need to move something using drag mode, be very careful you don't misclick for the aforementioned reason. Make custom pre-mades of things you place a lot. Like I said earlier, a pre-made of a tower portal will save you tons of time since you don't need to build one from scratch in every new Obby slot, or copy, paste, and move an existing one if there already is one. Not that that's really that bad, but I mean, hey, you can save a little bit more time here, so yeah. While we're talking about custom pre-mades, these are the key to moving things between Obby slots. Make a custom pre-made out of it, and then place that in the Obby slot you want to move it to. I have used this trick in the past to move entire towers, however I did have to move it in multiple pre-mades as there's a limit for how many parts can make up a pre-made. If you're ever unsure of what to make the next section of your tower be, open up the add menu and basically just stare at it until you think of something. Seeing all the different types of parts will help you decide what to build next. If you still can't decide what to build, just pick a random part type and use it. To center parts, use the feature where you hold control and scale in both directions. Let's say I wanted to center this part next to this part. I'll scale this part to be the length of the other one and then hold control to scale in both directions until it's the size I want. You can also do this to center parts in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. Another thing you can do is, let's say I want to take these 3 parts and center them like along these 3 parts. What you can do is find the center point of each of these and match them up. So I will scale this, I'm doing this in 1 dimension, so like this. So I'd scale this to be the length of this and then do that. So that's the center point of here. Then right here, I would do the same. I can move this over so it'll be a little bit easier to match up. And then I'll select all of these and then move it so they line up here. It looks like they can't, with 0.5 snap to grid, but there, now they do line up. Use temporary parts to measure distances. For example, if you want to place an 11.5 stud long jump, place a temporary part like this and scale it so that it's 11.5 studs. I showed this as I was demonstrating building a long jump earlier in this video. You want to then place another part on the other side, and then if you want the player to be able to count the amount of studs, keep the temporary part, but make it look like this. Otherwise, just delete it. When you're placing platforms, you want to be equally spaced. Change your snap to grid to a number between 6 and 15. It depends on the part you're working with, what number you use. Then just copy and paste the part to move it. While moving long distances in camera mode, scroll up as well for additional speed. To easily set the size of a part to something precise and in 1 dimension, set your snap to grid to what you want that amount to be. Then scale it out a lot and then back in. It'll change the size to whatever your snap to grid is. This is much faster than using 0.01 snap to grid and tediously scaling it to the exact size you want. Also, this trick works if you scale in both directions by holding control. Both destination locations of a moving part can be changed at the same time if you move one of them using the scale tool instead of move. That's because scale affects both destinations while move only affects one. Okay, and the tower is now finished, so at the end of all my videos, I always play through the whole thing start to finish, so that's what we're going to do now. If you want to complete this, here's the Obby ID right here. So, Tower of Updated Video Tutorials, currently the only tower here. Okay, I realized I didn't clear featured obbies yet, this time being in the private server. But you start like that, and then you have these head hitters, and then you have an 11.5 stud long jump. You can align on this tight rope, but it's kind of easy otherwise. Then you have this timed button section. Also not too hard. And then you have these conveyors. Then you gotta jump to this conveyor. And then do that conveyor launch jump. Then you go across the fading parts onto the ladder. Then you go over here onto the falling parts. On this universal part, you will gain increased jump speed. And on this one, it'll reset it. Then you gotta do this jump carefully. And not do that. There we go. Then you go across the kill bricks, and then you get to here. We got to do this to go into climbing animation on that half stud. I just nerfed the speed section a little bit because it was way too much of a difficulty spike. You could maybe see specifically how I did that, but it's not that much different. So then you have another long jump. You get teleported over here. Then you have these beat blocks. Then you go onto the trip parts, and these are all moving parts. So then you gotta get up here and do this push box section, Press the button now, so that activated this ladder over here. This right here is where you get teleported if you touch the track here, because there's a sign that says roll the push ball across the track to reach the win pad. If you touch the track, you'll be teleported back to the push box section. So you do exactly what it says, and there we go. Right, I moved this over, so I need to change the teleport location, which is just to a temporary win room since I haven't actually made one yet for rank 3. That's going to be the end of today's video. I really hope this tutorial helps you, and if it does, please make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate that. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and have a great day.